a couple of slides, and then I'm going to start showing you some of the elements of the processes that we have in place for various elements of GDPR, and kind of happy to answer any questions as we go through. So whilst I'm demoing, I can't see any hands up or any questions. So Jess is going to keep an eye on that for me, and she'll just either, please feel free to interrupt yourselves. If not, Jess will just interrupt me with any questions that we have as we go through. So I will start sharing. So as I said, we've done those introductions, but Dr. Anne Hawkins, and I'm Chief Operating Officer of Coalescent Limited. Touching a little bit more on where we have come from then, we've been involved in the public sector, selling en masse GDPR type services across that public sector for the last 15 years. This particular product was born out of a collaboration where all those organisations that you see in front of you, so a real mix of the universities, local authorities, the NHS, couple on there that you might not know, Information and Records Management Society. They are a great partner of ours and know literally everything that there is to know in this space. So they were really critical in helping us shape all our product set. ACNEL training providers, so they do the GDPR training as well. They're probably the biggest provider in this space in terms of training. They were also on our board, as well as the London Office of Technology and Innovation, Lottie, that pink logo there. They represent every single London borough, and so the entire London local authorities group are a customer of Dapium. And then the most importantly, of course, the ICO, they sit on our board as well and help us shape the product on a kind of monthly basis, sit down with us and support any new feature development that we have. So that's where we came from. The product itself is a relatively new product. It was literally kicked off as the first COVID lockdown happened back in that March, and we had a remit which was within 6 months we need to have an alpha product out there, which we did, and then since, of course, evolved it through the alpha and beta phases, and now into production strength products, and rolled them out en masse across the public sector. We started with DPIAs, and that's kind of our initial, I suppose, scope of the product was limited to DPIAs, and then we evolved it beyond that into information sharing agreements, into impact assessments, and equality impact assessments, and other kind of processes that happen there. We're now in a position where we are building an information asset register and record of processing activity, which, instead of being a distinct product where you're maintaining that, it's actually fed by the DPIAs and any information that's held in the broader Dapium product, to ensure that, to kind of give that helping hand in terms of keeping that information asset register and record of processing activity up to date. So if I start back at the beginning, where in our discovery phase we were talking to the collaborating organisations, so to say, all entirely public sector organisations, and their challenges were that they had their IG team. They're not big teams, contrary to public belief. They are probably 1 or 2 people, sometimes 4 or 5, but that's as big as they tend to get, that's managing sort of 11,000 people in the business and their requirements for DPIAs and all the other IG type components. And they're totally at capacity, and they are the people that the heavy lifting of a DPIA is falling to. And their desire is that they push that responsibility back into the wider business, so that it leaves them space or headspace to focus on supporting those, providing their expert input, rather than actually driving the DPIA itself. So it kind of gives them the capacity to support the wider business with that. The reason why that's not happening is the staff cohort, that's not what their day-to-day job is. They're not in IG, they're running adult social care, children's services, revs and vens, whatever it might be. But as part of their day-to-day activities, they are running projects or implementing services that have impact on personal data. So they do have to touch DPIAs quite often. They're not or they're just kind of throwing it to the IG team saying, oh, I have no idea what I'm doing because the processes are so complicated and they're full of jargon and all the things that we are probably aware of ourselves. So that was the entire remit, was stop the IG team from having to do all of the DPIAs, push the responsibility back to the wider business. That's only possible if we support that with a digital toolkit that simplifies and handholds non-experts through this process. And that's our kind of entire ethos. Everything we build is about supporting non-experts through the process. You're probably aware of all sorts of other products that sit in this space. We aren't alone in this market by any stretch of the imagination. But the public sector aren't in the business of paying and funding for a product that already exists. So that's our kind of USP, is that we are entirely focused at supporting non-experts through this, whilst giving the expert IG functions that oversight and input so they can prod and poke. But we don't build stuff just for the IG team to manage their stuff. There's loads of pieces of kit out there that does that. This is about that transition and getting a much broader empowerment across the business. We implemented, took all those challenges and built the resulting product that we have now. I'm very proud to announce that we have won quite a few awards for this now. Our most recent ones up there for the last year. The Institute Information Records Management Society, and indeed Digital Leaders as well for 2021. So they've been our achievements this year, and we hope to be there again next year with even more product to put in front of them. So that's my slide set. I'm now just going to jump through into the product and talk about how we go through these phases. But before I do that, I'll outline the different types of permission sets that we have in here. So as I said, this is a toolkit for everyone that needs to get involved in the process to have their role to play. There's always a role for the IG team. They're always there to provide that support and oversight and prod and poke, but very much hoping that the staff members can drive a lot more of this for themselves. So we have a set of permissions for staff. They're able to complete screening questions, and it will tell them if they need to do a DPIA, what type of DPIA template would best suit their needs, and if there's any information sharing agreement required or data ethics or any of the other kind of components that we have here. It will identify those as well. And then it will lead them on to complete those forms and handhold them through the production of them, providing kind of plain English guidance in how to construct their responses. They're also able to be collaborative in the production of them, so they can bat them around the organisation over to suppliers or partners if that's appropriate for them to provide their input, ask the IG team for support if they need it. Once they've done that and they've got their beautifully constructed DPIA, they would then probably look to move it on either to the IG team or ultimately the information asset owner to sign up and provide that signature on the end. So we have a set of permissions that's designed for the signatories, where they're able to take that responsibility for sign off. I'd be interested to hear from your perspective what happens in your organisations, but I know in the public sector particularly, whilst there's a desire for the directors and heads of services to play the information asset owner role, in reality, that doesn't happen or is only just happening because we've implemented Dapian and it's allowed them to make that shift. But ultimately, before this was in place, it was ultimately their IG teams and their DPOs that was taking that responsibility for sign off. Is that a similar position that you guys are in within your respective organisations, or have you managed to get that responsibility shifted? No. So moving on from that, then the signatory role, you've got the advisory role. So anyone that's making recommendations in this process, there's a specific set of permissions that allows them to come in and make those recommendations where appropriate. Then finally, a really restricted set of permissions for anyone that wants to give access to people that are outside of their organisation, so their suppliers and their partners, to give them access to specific elements if you need to be collaborative across organisational boundaries on any of the work that you're doing. Right, so that's those bits. I will jump up to the demo of the product. There is always the opportunity for you guys to have access to this environment that I'm demoing here. If that's of interest to anyone, we aren't going to be able to cover the in detail questions that are asked because there's just not enough time in this session. But if anyone does want to see the product and use it for themselves and test it out, do just get in touch with myself or Jess, and we can get you signed up to the product free of charge, and you can play around with that to your heart's content in our demo environment. So this is the resulting product, and this is our demo version of it. Each customer has their own instance. It's operated as what's called software as a service. So we host and manage everything. The only IT implications here are that you have access to a modern browser and that you have an internet connection. That is literally it. And when you arrive on the homepage, it will kind of tell you a little bit about what the features and functions of the product are. And ultimately, we have this web chat down here in the right-hand corner. That comes to a member of my team here, and we'll answer any questions you have about using the product. If as staff on a day-to-day basis are using it, if they have any questions, they can come to us and ask any questions that they have about using the product. So I'm going to sign myself in. You have two options when it comes to sign in. You either have what we provide, which is our own identity platform. We use Auth0, or you can use your corporate identity platform that you have already and achieve single sign-on instead. So either of those are an option here. I'm just going to sign in myself. So when you first land into the product, depending on the type of user you are, you'll have a dashboard that represents the role that you have to play. So, for example, the IG team have a broad view of what's going on across all of their DPIA cases. They can prod and poke where they need to, as opposed to staff members having more of a kind of, this is what's in my world, my responsibility to do, and things that I'm needing to get on with. That's their kind of their own world rather than the corporate view of the world. And then you're here probably first of all maybe to start your DPIA and then move through the other components, the other IG components as well. But start as a staff member that knows they're about to embark on a new project and that they don't know if they need to do a DPIA or not, and probably don't know where to start. So the first thing that they would do is come along to DPIAs and then start their DPIA here. And this will then lead them through a series of questions that will tell them if they need to do one and what to do if they don't need to do one, and then we'll give them those forms to complete. So it's just checking my details remain the same. There's nothing I want to do there. And now you're going to name whatever the service or project is that you're about to work on. So if we put the department in its finance, this can be a drop-down list of your departments so that there's no ambiguity as to what that should be called. Let's do Teams, and then use of Teams. We'll skip through this as quickly as we can. Project sponsor. These are important fields because we often find when we're talking to our customer base about what the bottlenecks are and why these processes take so long, it's often because they haven't identified who the key players are in this process. So we get them to think early on about who the person is that takes responsibility for sign off right up early so that doesn't become a bottleneck later. So I've named my DPIA and we move on to the screening questions. So this was the first point in the process where the ICO got heavily involved and helped us to shape these questions and provide all the guidance text that comes along with this. We kind of overlay some sensible plain English language on top of that. Some of the jargon that's used in the templates that I've seen, I'm not surprised that people struggle with answering these sorts of questions. There are places where you can't get rid of that. Special category data isn't probably a term that everyone understands, but it's necessary as it's a defined term. So we can't get rid of that. Instead, what we do is provide green guiding text literally everywhere in the product to help support those non-experts through this process, hand-holding them with every single question if appropriate. So I'm going to spin through these 13 questions. I say, please don't feel the need to read them. I'm very happy for any of you to have demo access to play with this yourselves. So I'm doing this randomly. I don't even know if this combination is possible. It's only 13. Last question coming up. So at the end of this, it then tells you that a DPIA is required. The full DPIA is the best template for them. And there's also, given the way that I've answered this, a CCTV requirement as well. There's no duplication between these forms. They're supplementary to each other. We also have an international data transfer form that if that's unearthed as being one of the requirements, then that's suggested as well. We also deal with all the law enforcement versions. The Metropolitan Police Service is one of our biggest customers. So they use law enforcement versions of these forms as well. So all of those forms are available to you to use in regards to a DPIA. There's also, of course, the question, well, what happens when a DPIA isn't required and it's still useful to evidence why a DPIA wasn't done? So if I was to reframe the questions reframe the answers I've given, there is scenarios where a DPIA isn't required. And what happens at that point is it directs the individual to the IG team just to have a conversation to check that that was indeed the right response, and invites them to give a summary of that conversation so that you've got that for auditing purposes later on if you need to evidence why a DPIA wasn't done. So that response and these screening questions are saved for you to come back to for any evidence that might require you to evidence why a DPIA wasn't done. So I do need to do one, so we'll go ahead and do one. We'll just hit the next step. It's going to scene set for me a bit and tell me what to expect next in the process. And then if I hit submit, what I now get is the outline of my DPIA case. And there's my screening questions, and I can revisit those if I need to. What I'm here really to do, though, is to start my DPIA, and I do that by adding the ones that I want. So the full DPIA, for example. I'll just quickly touch on the others that we have here that we haven't come across yet. So we've got the data ethics assessments there for when that becomes appropriate to use, and also an information sharing agreement as well. And I'll explain how that works as we go through. For now, I will just select one of the DPIA forms. Then you select the person that's going to do this. So if it's the IG team, we know a couple of our organizations, the IG team are still holding on to some of that responsibility, and they would be assigning it to, say, the project manager for them to go on and do. So the IG team are driving it. The majority of our customer base, though, just lets the staff member get on with it, and the staff member will be driving this from start to finish. So I'm going to leave it assigned to myself, but equally I could search for another person to assign this to if I wanted to. So I'm going to next step. That status is still fine, and then a bit more scene setting, and off we go. So now in my list of things, as well as my screening questions, I have this full DPIA, and I need to go ahead and complete that. So we'll open that up. So what we have here then is our standardized best practice version of our full DPIA that's had the sign off from the ICO. Well, actually, to be fair, they built most of it. And the input from our entire customer base across the public sector now have helped us refine and shape our best practice version. I'm not going to suggest we go through all of these questions. I say, please feel free just to ask me for the demo access, and we'll happily give you access to that to play with yourselves. The couple of features I will outline, though, because I think they're important, was one of the pieces of feedback that we've been dealing with across the discovery phase that we ran a couple of years ago, was that the templates that were in circulation, the Word document templates, say, that many organizations might use, they were just generally off-putting by the length of them. So we really have kept these forms as short as possible and only asking people to answer the questions where it's absolutely necessary. So a very basic level example would be, well, if I say no to this question here about it being linked to another project, there's no further questions to ask me about that. It's only when I say yes that these additional questions then unveil themselves. So that's the same approach we've taken all the way through, and tested this very heavily with real users that are non-IG experts to check that the language and the approach that we're taking meets their needs. The other thing that we've done is we know that the most difficult point in this process is the identification of risks. So we also give users a helping hand there by proactively suggesting to them what some of the risks might be based on the way that they have answered this template. So I'm going to answer a couple of questions to show you how that works, saying we haven't identified the data controller or the processor, and we don't have the lawful basis. So we'll say no to that one as well. So when I get to the end of this template, I won't bore you with it. Please feel free just to explore this yourself. When we get to the end of here, we are looking at the last point, which is section 10, the identification of risks. So we kind of set the scene for that and why that's important. And then we give a series of suggested risks. And what that's doing is it's learning from the way that I have completed this form. And it's also scanning across the DPIAs that we have completed by other organisations, and we're learning from the answers that they're given there. And we proactively suggest a series of risks and mitigating actions, if we can, that are relevant to the way that this DPIA has been completed. So once you've got to this point, you're then looking at this list of things that says, oh, hang on, these are glaringly obvious to us that these are risks that you need to consider, particularly the ones I pointed out as we went through. One is the failure to identify the data controller and or data processor, and the other one is to satisfy the common law duty of confidentiality for health and care purposes. So those are things that then fall into their list of suggested risks. And to include those, if you agree with them as the user, you click on them, and that will add them to the risk section for you automatically. In reality, you're probably looking to include all of these, but we'll do one or two for now. What this also does is it takes a non-expert user and gives them an example list of things that are relevant. So the types of risks we're looking at here are not that the project's going to overrun. It's not that no one's going to engage with it. It's not that it's going to run out of budget. They're about personal data. So that we frame that to help users then understand what on earth we mean by and what we're looking for from these sorts of risks. As soon as we implemented that as a feature, we looked at the quality of the DPIAs that were then coming in to the organizations, and the increase was about 58% in terms of quality of literally overnight, of the sorts of risks that were being submitted, and that they were relevant and well considered. So we could select all of these, but we won't. We'll just do a couple for now. And what this does next then is it says, great, you've looked at the suggested risks. Now you need to think about what your own manual ones are. We've given you some guidance, so start constructing your own manual risks as well, and that gives you the template to do that. Leads you through what the impact is. It will then ask you to score it before the mitigating action is there. Notice we're not using the word mitigation. Tested heavily with end users. Lots of people didn't understand what the word mitigation meant, so we changed that language for reduce or eliminating the risk. So that's based on a 5x5 matrix, so it's probably catastrophic before you've mitigated. Then what your mitigating action would be, again, follow the kind of guidance that you're given. Who owns that action, on what date is that going to be done, and then rescore it after the mitigating action. Hopefully that is reduced, and it will automatically calculate the overall risk score there. You can add and remove sections as you need to. Once you've done your manual risks, there's no limit to the number of risks you include, that the template will just keep giving you new templates until you're kind of done. It will then lead you through the suggested risks. So this was the one that we selected most recently, about the failure to satisfy the common law, duty of confidentiality, and then the other one, the financial trust. That's the impact of that. So it will pre-populate this template for them as much as it can. It will even do the scoring for them. They can override it if need be, but that's what the experience has told us that should be. And then if we know it, it would have populated the mitigating action as well. Not always possible. Obviously, mitigating actions are very personal to the organisation. But where we can, we pre-populate all of that for them. And then it will drop them into the next one, and so on and so forth, until you've done all of your risks. And at the end, you're given the option to keep adding or removing sections as you need to. So that's how the template for a DPIA looks. They're also entirely collaborative. So if I get stuck on a certain question I want, or it's someone else's job to do that particular question, I can save and come back to this as many times as I like. And I might say I need some support from the IG team. So I'm going to reassign this and I'm going to assign it to, say, John Smith or whoever that might be. Select this user because I have access to that user. And say, can you help me with question 3.1, maybe? And then submit. What this is now going to do is it's going to build my conversation with John Smith or the information asset owner, whoever that might be, and it's going to notify them via email to say that there's something expected of them and provide them with instructions on how to access and support Leanne. So if I look at my email inbox, this is Google, this is Gmail, but it would be whatever your email inbox client is, so Outlook or whatever else you might be using. But I get these notifications come in, and I can see here that it says Leanne is saying, can you help me with question 3.1? And it will give me the link to go in and provide support. If I don't want to go in, maybe I don't want to have an identity with this platform, and I know the answer to the question that Leanne's asking me, so it's just going to be an extra step if I log in and actually provide my support. I can just reply to this email in the same way I would reply to every other email. And it will drop that response back into the product for you. So none of this conversation is lost. And I can attach any attachments if I want to as well, and that will send those in along with it. So I'll just send that off. And maybe that might be my job done to support Leanne with doing that. But you can bat this back and forth and around the organisation as much as you need and want to, until everyone's happy that this DPIA is up to the quality that everyone needs it to be, ready for sign off, which we'll cover next. So give it a few minutes, but that response will land in here. So there it is there. So nothing is lost. Anything that happens in that email conversation will be popped into the product so that it is auditable later. Also, anything that I do in this DPIA, and whatever user it might be, is tracked in version and version control, and it will outline exactly what the changes were. If I open up any of these, it will tell me who made those changes at what time, so you can revert back and have that evidence if you need to. Let's go back there. The other thing you can do is you can add watchers to this. So, for example, if you're familiar with eBay, you might not be ready to actually get involved in bidding on something, but you just want to see and you want to be aware of how something is progressing. So you might have some line managers that you're not asking to get involved, but they want to be kept up to date with how this is progressing. So the system will drive notifications out to them to let them know what's going on and provide them with status updates as and when necessary. But you can add those people as watchers. There are automatically people that get added to the watchers list. So the person that created the DPIA and the person that Leanne was collaborating on, they will automatically be added as watchers, but you can add anyone else that you want to and remove anyone else that you want to as well. So I'll come away with that. Right, so we've done our DPIA. Right? What happens next is it needs to go through some sort of sign off. So sorry, if we look at our list at the moment, we've got our screening questions, we've got our full DPIA. You'd be looking to submit that. I can't do that in this demo because it would fail for all sorts of reasons that it's blank. But what you would do then is you would be, if you had done your full DPIA properly, you'd be able to submit it, and that would then drop it into the IG team for them to have a look at. Or you can reassign it to the person you want to kind of give you any input on that with. So once that happens, the IG team will get a notification, or the person it's been assigned to will get a notification to say, hey, this thing is here, come in and have a look at it. But equally, you have access to the full caseload, so you can see, oh, this one is new that's come in, let's have a look at what that one is. And you'd be reviewing all the documents in here, and then you'd be making some sort of recommended changes or sign off decision. And the way that you do that is to add those in here. So you go, right, we recommend some changes. That might be the first thing that you're going to do. I'll leave it assigned to me. And then you have that here. And you complete the form with your recommended changes, and that will notify Leanne that you've done that and that she's expected to come back in and refine her DPIA in line with the changes that you're making. Once she's done that, you might make a different decision. So let's have a look at that. That could be, you might have some more recommended changes. That's fine. Go through those cycles as many times as you need to. Or it might be that you absolutely hate it. You want them to walk away from this now. Or it might be that you're happy to give the recommendation that this is signed off, which is obviously which is different to saying this is signed off. This is just your recommendation to say that you in principle are happy that this would get signed off. So we'll say that that's our next logical decision. So you would have then your case building through from the beginning up through your recommended changes, and hopefully finally given the recommendation to sign off. So let's open that. Yes, I accept that. I'm happy providing this happens, then whatever it might be that you say, and then you submit that. So that action then drives the notifications to the information asset owner and to Leanne to say that she's got that recommendation that she can sign off. So either the sign off happens by the IG team, because that's your business policy that the IG team are still taking that responsibility, or the information asset owner is someone else in the business, and that's great. That notification has gone to them to say that they are now expected to take that responsibility for sign off. So once they've got that notification, they'd be looking to come in here and change the status of this DPIA to something else. Now, the system is sort of clever in that it won't let you make a silly sign-off decision. It's not going to let you reject this DPIA, because that makes no sense based on the way that we've constructed this. We've been given a recommendation to sign off. So if that's the case, it will stop me from doing that. And it will tell me why and tell me what I would need to do to change that. So here it's basically saying you're missing this critical piece of the puzzle. That's why we're not going to let you do that. Instead, I can make a signed off decision, and that will let me make that. Done. So then everyone will get their notifications to say that that DPIA has now been signed off. And it will also lock the DPIA. I know that they're living, breathing documents. I'll come back to that in a second, but we lock it because that's the way that DPIA looked at the point that it was signed off. So if you're wanting to conduct any reviews, or because something's changed, then you can come back and do that, but you can't change this DPIA because that might it disrupts that kind of process that we've been through. So set your review schedules. That will force you to set the dates that you need to come back and do that. And it will then drive the notifications out to tell and remind people that this review date is coming up. Let's say that's today, and we need to come back and review this DPIA. The way that we do that is we don't touch this DPIA because that's how it looked when it was signed off. Instead, we take a clone of it, which will give you an exact replica of this DPIA. It will link it back to this one, so it will relate the DPIAs together, but it puts it back into an editable state for you to update it with anything that has changed since. And then it will go, then you would need to go back through your sign-off processes and get that DPIA signed off. But you've always got the audit trail and the cookie crumb trail to show where this has come from and how it's evolved through various different versions, so that you've got that there. They're all linked to each other. So that's the DPIA bit. I'm not going to cover much more on that. If anyone else wants to see that in more detail, please do just shout and we'll give you that demo access. There are some other bits in here that are really useful for organizations that work regularly across organizational boundaries. So if you want to share your DPIAs with another organization, then you can use this feature here and start to share those across your organizational boundaries. If you don't do anything, your DPIAs will be kept private to you as an organization. If you want to change it, you have to proactively go in and change and mark that DPIA as being more publicly available or available to that organization. What you can also do, and what is very actively used across the public sector, is this external search piece. So it's not much. There is a little bit in here. This is the demo version, but what this is a space where organizations can drop great examples of DPIAs. So just a couple of weeks ago, we had a new customer join us who were about to embark on the production of a DPIA on Microsoft Teams. Had no idea where to start, but by looking in external search, they were able to find 3 examples of DPIAs on Microsoft Teams, and then get access to those or redacted versions of those and consider those for reuse in their own organizations, or at least take a steer from them to help them produce their own. So that's just another tool where we're providing that library of best practice examples to help those non-experts with understanding what on earth is in a DPIA and finding one that's loosely related to the area that I'm interested in. So that's a great feature as well that's being used. If we go on then to information sharing agreements, so that it's an optional module that you can bolt on, so you don't have to have it, it's entirely optional. Let me pick up the DPIA that I did yesterday. In this particular one, we've got the DPIA already, which is fine, but as part of this process, it's the DPIA has identified that I need an information sharing agreement, so I can add that in here as well. So I'd add that as an item. I'll take the information sharing agreement, please. I want data ethics as well, maybe. So we'll do that in a second. I'll leave it assigned to me. So now I have in my list this information sharing agreement. They work in exactly the same way. When you open them up, the templates look and feel very similar. Obviously, the difference here is that there is distinct places and points where the parties are expected to come up and sign up to this. So the whole kind of sharing across organizational boundaries is key, because then you can invite that person or that organization to come in and put their signatures on these documents where you're sharing and agreeing what this content should be. But other than that, it works in exactly the same way by being able to save your progress and returning to it, inviting other people into it, adding them to the watchers list because they're interested in how this thing is progressing. What you can also do is attach any files. This goes for all of our forms. If there's any other documentation that's relevant to the information sharing agreement, to the DPIA, whatever it might be, you can upload them there and provide a bit of explanation as to what that document is and why it's there. That can sit alongside your DPI process maps, for example, if that's important to have as part of this particular case. So that then shows those ones. And I can just keep adding any of the different forms that we have until we're kind of building everything in one place so that everything's under one roof. You'll see here that this one actually originated from another DPIA, because this is a review of a previous one. So that's linked that together so that you can see the origins of that as well. That's a good example of how we relate DPIAs together. So that's our DPIA process of empowering the wider organisation to take more responsibility, whilst giving the IG team that oversight to push and prod where they need to. Information sharing agreements is also in there, as well as data ethics, but there is some more stuff that we've been doing since then, so I'll cover that off next. Is there any questions anyone has at this point before we move on to information asset registers and record of processing activity? No, that's fine. Please do just feel free to interrupt. So where we've come from, we've covered all these bits in the demo, but we've got screening questions. We've standardized all the DPIA assessments and had those signed off by the ICO as along with the information sharing agreements, the quality impact assessments. And we've done a lot in regards to the automated risk generation, where we're helping people proactively suggesting risks that emerge from that process. Very much all in plain English, and providing that guiding text and supporting everyone through their review processes as well. It's all collaborative, and it's a full case management system with all the audit trails that you would expect to be in place for this sort of tool. You can use it on any device. It doesn't matter whether you're using it on a smartphone or a tablet or your laptops or PCs. It works on every device as long as you have a browser and an internet connection. It renders beautifully. It's offered as software as a service, and of course is subject to all the security implications that you would expect it to be. And we have that documentation for anyone that is interested in seeing that. So where we're going next, we'll say we're currently building our information asset register. There are a couple of co-funding organisations. So the original local authorities are funding the development of that, and we're not nearly there, not quite ready to release to major production yet, but we're not far off. So we have our information asset register and our record of processing activity, which come in a single module, and they are obviously being able to maintained manually, as you're probably expecting to you are at the moment. But more importantly, they're actually receiving a feed from Dapian, the DPIAs, and any other information that's relevant from Dapian, and therefore it is automatically populating and keeping those registers more up to date than would normally be. So that's the kind of the link between the two there. We want to add more automated risks, so we're doing that kind of organically. As we have more and more DPIAs going through the system, we're able to learn from those DPIAs and proactively suggest more and more of those automated risks. There are other processes we want to add in now, so any supplier assessments, so IT supplier type assessments, we'll be dropping those in soon, and the ability to generate your action plan for risk protection from that, as from your list of risks and the actions that result from that. The ICO are really keen to see an escalation form in there. At the moment, the engagement with ICO would be that you would email them and have that conversation. They're actually keen for a proper process to be in place within Dapian to provide that escalation as a more structured process. We're just starting some work on managing data breaches. So that's anyone's interested in that piece of work, just shout, because we can link you into that specific conversation that's being had. Mostly being led by the universities and the local authorities that are in our customer base, and then subject access requests as well, forming quite a closely aligned piece of work to the data breaches as well. Same line of work anyway. So that's where we are going with the product, and that should all be rolled out within the next 3 to 6 months. We've got quite a big team of developers that work on this on a full-time basis, so we will see that roadmap rolled out relatively quickly. Very happy to hear from anyone if there are any other things that you think we should be considering as part of the product set. Particularly, we offer the software, but we have partnerships with training providers and other IG consultancy type firms as well. And we're probably thinking about putting some packages together that involve a mix of that. So training on GDPR that aligns with the use of Dapian and how those two go together, and then any IG consultancy that might be needed as part of that. And we have all of those partnerships in our group, so we'll be offering some packages, I think, that cover all of those pieces intertwined with each other. These are the benefits that our customer base has seen. These aren't made up. These are us revisiting our customer base every 6 months and asking them what's changed since we last spoke to them and the improvements that they've seen. I'll explain exactly where the efficiency savings of 64% comes from in a second, but the definite increase in the number of DPIAs that are coming through, their backlogs are non-existent now, and the quality of those DPIAs and information sharing agreements that are coming through is significantly improved, as well as them being able to lift their heads a bit in the IG team away from doing DPIAs and providing that oversight role that they should be playing. Really pleased to hear that lots of our customer base now have really pushed the responsibility for taking sign off to the directors or to the managers in the business that should be the information asset owners, as opposed to the IG team just signing things off, because that's been the easiest solution up until now. The business case, then, this is where the efficiency savings come in. So I'll play that out for you. This is on average across our customer base. This isn't just one or two. This is averaged out. So it could be higher or lower, some of these figures, depending on how you shape up as an organization. But this was before Dapium was implemented. So the average salary of the individual where the DPIA was falling to was on average the 45k mark. Bear in mind, lots of our businesses are based in London, so that's probably a relatively high salary compared to the rest of the country, but that is what it averaged out at. And then 1,680 hours that they can work in a year. On average, each of those people were doing just over 23 DPIAs in a year. That meant that the cost for them delivering a DPIA was just shy of £2,000 in what we call their analog world. We then implemented Dapium, and we wanted to keep the parameters the same because we wanted it to be worst case scenario. In actual fact, what has happened is that the salary of the individual is much, much lower than 45k, because it's been pushed out to the broader business to take responsibility for that. But we thought, no, we're going to keep it as worst case scenario, because if this stacks up as worst case scenario, you're only going to be even more pleased when that over delivers. So keeping the parameters the same, the number of DPIAs that person ended up getting through is actually nearly 65, and therefore the cost for each DPIA reduced for them down to just below 700. It is actually much, much lower than that, because you're not looking at a 45k salary anymore. But that's worst case scenario, so that was good. That meant the efficiency savings turned out to be just shy of 64%, or £1,200 per DPIA that those organisations are saving. We are very, very public and transparent about the way that everything we do. Our website is very clear on what our pricing is. So, for example, our pricing structure is laid out on our website. Those are the prices. There's nothing hidden. There's no additional charges that come out of the woodwork. It's all publicly published for you. If you want to run the calculations for yourself, because you don't sign up to the fact that your salaries are that, or that you're doing that many DPIAs, there's a blank business case on the website for you. Just put in your own numbers, and that will then deliver out the same sums based on your own figures. So that's there for you as well. And as I say, anyone that does want to explore this on their own in more detail, just let us know, and we're very happy to get you signed up with a free trial to that product that I've been demoing this afternoon, so you can explore all the detail that you might want to see before you make any decisions about where this might go. So I think that is largely everything I had to say, and I'm just in time. Very last slide then, in terms of if you decide that there's something in this digital space that you think would be of value to the organization, or there's any other questions we can help with, if you want any support with I don't know, some IG consultancy or whatever, we do have plenty of contacts that come highly recommended amongst the public sector, certainly. And we'd be happy to connect you with any of those, or help with any questions where we can. Implementation for this, as I said, software as a service, so we literally deal with everything for you. There are no IT requirements as long as you have a modern browser and an internet connection. It takes about 3 days for us to deliver you with your instance. It's a very quick turnaround for that. All of our pricing structures come with unlimited number of users, so you don't have to worry about the number of licenses you have. The price is the price. Get as many people as you need to using the product. It's all included as part of your subscription. It comes with a full service level agreement. We host and manage everything for you, and we provide the training to use it as well. And you can implement single sign-on if that's what you want to do, but it works beautifully without as well. So that is all I have. Any questions, please, we'll hang around for a few minutes, but otherwise, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. We're here to help. On our website, there's web chat as well. Just drop us a line and we can point you in any right directions where that's useful. But thank you very much for joining. You know where we are if you need us.